Well, hey there, everybody. It's your boy, Mr. Perry, and welcome to Unit 7. We're going to be getting into Lesson 1, which is all about these things called array lists. So let's not talk about array lists before doing a quick little review of arrays, which we learned about in the previous unit. So just a couple of quick things to remember about arrays. With arrays, we have this new syntax that we had to work with. We have to start using the square brackets. So to create an array of integers, you would say int array, call it lucky nums, equals new int, and then you have a number 3. Remember, any number that you put in here determines the length of the array. So we got to have a number in here, and this will tell Java how much memory space to allot for that particular array. Once you have it created, this of course is just full of a bunch of zeros, so we now need to assign values to them. So here's how you would put actual values in this array, lucky nums. We can also do it this way. We can create an array of strings, call it names, and set it equal to, these 4 names these determine how many items the length is determined by how many items are listed in the initializer list. So rather than doing it like this and then putting them in separately, you can just throw all of the information that you want into an array by using these curly braces here and here, and then the semicolon on the end. But what's important with arrays is they do have a determined length, and this length cannot be changed. Once you assign and initialize, once you declare and initialize an array, the length is going to be fixed. And so arrays have some pros, but they also have some cons. Arrays store many values with fewer lines of code. So rather than storing all of these values as separate variables, we can make use of data abstraction, and we can say, instead of doing these as all separate variables, let's just do one list and have it store everything. There are multiple ways to declare an array, so I guess that flexibility could be considered a pro. It's easy to process data using loops. Once you have an array created, and as long as you're familiar with loops, then it's pretty easy to kind of go through and do what you want to do. And the other nice thing about arrays is they can store primitive data types as well as reference data types. So you can have an array of ints, booleans, and doubles, but you can also have an array of strings. You can also have an array of objects of a class. So any class that you create, you can store different objects of them in an array. So arrays are flexible with that, which is kind of nice. But there are some cons with arrays. First off, arrays are immutable, which means that the length is set in stone once the array is created. I also consider the fact that there are multiple ways to declare them perhaps maybe a con, because again, you have to remember all of the different forms of syntax. And they can be difficult to work with. It requires some complex code and some complex algorithms in order to do different things with arrays, like inserting an element, shifting the elements, deleting elements, and so on and so forth. So that kind of begs the question, is there something else that we can use that maybe will still give us the benefits of arrays while maybe avoiding some of the cons? And that's where array lists come into play. So array lists are what's called a dynamic data structure that are used to store multiple values of the same reference data type. Now that's important. Array lists can only store reference data types. So we're going to have to make a couple of adjustments in order to work with our primitive data types. Unlike arrays, though, array lists can grow as well as shrink in size as needed. So that's one of the big benefits of them. So if you wanted to do like a Spotify playlist, you can think of an array list very similar to a Spotify playlist. If I want to add songs to my playlist, I can easily do that. If I want to delete songs from my playlist, I can easily do that. So this list can shrink as well as grow as needed. And the same thing would be true if you were making a shopping list or a to-do list. You could put as many items on here as you want to. You're not limited to only 10 or only 5. And so, again, array lists are similar to that. Array lists are mutable, meaning that they can change size. unlike strings and unlike arrays, which are immutable. Strings and arrays, once you've declared and created them, they have a fixed size. You can't change that because they are immutable. But array lists, they're immutable. You can change the size as necessary. So you can think of them as a resizable array that can only hold objects. These are sometimes referred to as lists. So like when you learned Python in CSP, we just called them lists. And in Java, we refer to them as array lists. But they are essentially the same thing as what you saw before. All right, so here's the deal. To create an array list, we need to call its constructor. So we've got some new syntax to learn once again. Now, at this point in the class, if you're getting a little overwhelmed by all of the new syntax, like we just had to learn new syntax for arrays, and now that we're doing array lists, it's like, oh great, even more. Here's the part in the class where I really want to point out how similar many lines of code are. So for instance, down here, string course equals new string APCSA. You're familiar with that line of code. You should understand that this creates a new string object called course and that it's storing this data. Scanner input equals new scanner system.in. So here's how you create an object of the scanner class, and that object is called input, right? But notice, the class name is over here, the variable name is here, equals new is always in the middle, the class name gets repeated over here, and then there might be something in our parentheses. Down here, album1 equals new album. This is me creating an album object called album1, and I'm calling the default constructor. So, again, you've seen this pattern before. So to create an array list, the syntax is very similar. You say array list data with the data type in between these angle brackets. Then you have to give it a name, equals new, and then array list with the data type again in between these angle brackets. And then the parentheses go on the end, just like parentheses always go on the end when you're calling a method, and then your semicolon. All right, so let's go ahead and break this down. You start with the word array list, and then your angle brackets here must be filled with a reference data type. So it would be string, it would be album, it could be a number of things, as we'll see, but it's got to be a reference data type in here, which means it's going to be capitalized. Next comes the variable name. So whatever you're going to call your array list, you have to give it a name right here, just like you have to name any object of a class. You have to give it a name. Next comes equals new, and then finally you just repeat the word array list again. And again, with your angle brackets and the data type, but this time you have to add your parentheses and then your semicolon. So this is how you create an array list. And then there's one other thing that you need to do. Array lists are not built in to the Java lang package, so you have to import it. Just like the scanner class, you can't use scanner unless you import java.util.scanner. Array lists are the same way. You have to have at the beginning of your file, you have to say import java.util.ArrayList. Then you can create an array list. So array list string contacts equals new array list string. So there you go. I've created a new array list of strings, and I've called it contacts. And I can only do that if I've done my proper import statement. So array lists of reference data types. So in Java, anything that is not a primitive data type, like ints, doubles, and booleans, is a reference data type. So I could create an array list of strings and call it contacts. I could create an array list of pet objects and call it myZoo, and have it again store a bunch of pet objects. I could also create an array list of album objects, and I could call it collection, and have that store, again, a bunch of album objects. And we'll see how to do this in the future here. But what about ints, doubles, and booleans? Since array lists only hold objects of a class, You can still use ints, doubles, and booleans with ArrayLists, but you have to use the wrapper class version for them, which basically means you have to capitalize the first letter and you have to make sure you're spelling them out completely. So you might remember this. This was the wrapper class was something we looked at in a previous unit. We haven't looked at it in a while, but one of the reasons that we do learn about the wrapper class is because we have to use the wrapper class in order to use ArrayLists. So if I wanted to create an array list of integers, I would say ArrayList, and then in my angle brackets, integer, call it nums maybe, and then equals new ArrayList. In my angle brackets, I've got integer, and then my parentheses. And then the same thing would happen with doubles or booleans. If I wanted to have an array list of doubles and call it averages, here's how I would do that. And if I wanted to have an array list of answers, of booleans, and call it answers, I could do that. So you can use primitive data types for an array list. You just have to make sure you're using the wrapper class version so that it technically is a reference data type. And so now another thing that we need to be aware of is that you can have a null array list, which basically means you've reserved memory space for it, but you just haven't assigned it any values yet. You haven't initialized it using the equal sign and then the keyword new. So right here, array list integer nums. All I've done is declared the data type and identified the variable name, but I don't have the equal sign and I don't have the word new. So what that means is my array list nums has a null value, meaning there's nothing in there. There's no object data being stored. Array list double averages, and I could say equals null, and this basically does the same thing. It just it says I'm identifying I'm identifying the fact that I'm going to need an array list of doubles called averages, but I don't have any object data to put in there yet. So I'm just kind of reserving some memory space without really giving it any dimension. Now down here, nums equals new array list of integers. That completes this line of code right here. This is like the second half of it down here. So now they've been initialized, so they are now empty lists that have dimension to them. And then if I did array list double averages equals null, but then I did averages equals new array list doubles, now I've completed it. I've got the equals sign and the keyword new, which again initializes this array list and again makes it an empty list. If you actually go into the source code for array lists, you can find out something interesting. When you open, if you were to go to the source code for array lists, you'll notice that it has a private static variable, which is final, meaning it cannot be changed, called default capacity, which sets it equal to 10. So what this tells us is anytime we create an array list, it automatically reserves 10 spaces. So we're going to look at how this plays out in this next one. So here I have array list of strings called contacts, and I've initialized it, equals new array list of strings. So this creates an empty list of 10 spaces because again that default capacity is 10. This is the same is true for wrapper class versions of primitive data types. So if I did array list double averages equals new array list double, it automatically opens up this empty list and just reserves memory space for it. So now what we need to do is we need to learn how to put stuff in our array list. So array lists have methods. One of the method is called the add method, where you give it a value. And this places the value at the end of the array list automatically. So if I created an array list of doubles called averages, again, I've got my empty list with 10 spaces. I can now say averages.add and then tell it what double I want to put in there. And then I could say averages.add and give it another double, and again, it would put it in at the end. And then averages.add, give it another double, and that would put it right here. So the add with a value always places that value at the end of the array list. But there's also another one. You can say add and then give it 2 parameters. The first one is an index value, and then the second one is the value that you want placed in there. And what this does is this places the value at the specified index, and then it bumps everything else down. So if I did averages.add 1, 75.9, what this means is go to index 1, add that value, 75.9, and then previously 65.7 was in that space. Well, that's now bumped down, right? And so all of the other ones get bumped down. So this starts to grow the size of my array list. I could also say averages.add at index 0, 35.5. And again, that goes to index 0, adds that value, and then everything that was in there previously, so previously it was 57.8, that all gets bumped down, okay? So the add, index, comma, value methods bump everything else down in the array list. So that's important to remember, is that it's going to make the size of the array list grow. All right, speaking of size, there is another array list method called size, which returns the number of values in the array list, not the number of spaces, because this does have a default, the default capacity is 10. But if I had these 5 lines of code and then said system.out.print averages.size, this is going to print the value of 5, all right, because there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 values in here. So just make sure you're not confusing capacity with size. Another interesting thing that happens with an array is what happens if you add more than 10 items in an array list. So let's say I had a bunch of other add statements in here, and we went ahead and we've maxed this array list out. It now has all 10 spaces are completely filled. So if I want to add another one, I can do that. And what it does is it adds another list of 10 spaces. So as soon as I add an 11th value, averages.add 70.0, what that does is adds another list of empty spaces, and it just continues to grow from there. So that's one of the reasons why array lists can grow, is because as soon as you go past the value of 10, it just adds another list on there and continues to go from there. All right, so with all of that, you should have everything that you need to start working through Lesson 1 in Unit 7, or you can check the ArrayList activities document for alternate ArrayList practice. Thanks so much, guys. I'll see you in class. Just so you know, if you do check out the slideshow, there are some links to the AP Daily videos, which will also help you review and understand ArrayLists. I'll see you in class.